Who would have thought that we are already in this position where the 2024 F1 season is nearly at an end, and also serves as a gentle reminder that time does often go way too fast. But there are still 3 races to go where a lot can happen. Reputations can still be made or equally destroyed, and there's a huge amount yet to be decided. So with some drivers looking to squeeze as much as possible into the last 3 races, or with some looking to count down the days until the season is over, let's have a look at what each driver must do before the end of the 2024 season. Okay, so I'm going to do this in the order of the driver's standing, so let's get started, but just before we do, why not click that little subscribe button below? Okay, so let's kick things off with the championship leader, Max Verstappen. Now, it's fair to say that Max has had his fair share of flack this season from pretty much the entire F1 world, some of it deserved, some not so deserved. Now, Max winning the Drivers' Championship this season is more or less an inevitability. It's going to happen, but the manner in which he goes about it, I think, is yet to be decided. Given that there are no assurances for the performance of Red Bull next season, and also because it will close a few people's mouths, Max must end the 2024 season conclusively. He'll be wanting to grind his competition into the dirt and stamp out any notions that Leclerc or Norris could get the better of him at any stage. And of course, there is still second place in the Constructors' Championship to fight for, and by this stage it's obvious that Max has shouldered most of this burden, and that's mainly because he's currently the only one at Red Bull who can put up a fight. But securing that second place in the Constructors will still mean millions in prize money, and the best way of doing that is a clean sweep in the final 3 races. Whether his car will actually allow him to do that at this stage is still a question. So with Max, the Drivers' Championship is in the bag, the Constructors is still to fight for, but he's going to want to show everybody out there who the boss still is. And so next up, of course, we have Lando Norris. Now, Lando faces quite an interesting run-in because now that the Drivers' Championship is a lost cause, I wonder if we'll see him drive with a new sense of freedom, perhaps. And also a return to some more brighter, happier, bubbly days for Orlando. He still, of course, has to secure second in the driver standings, but whether that will actually mean anything to him by this stage is another story. But in any of the next 3 races, if he's starting from pole, he has got to get a handle on those starts. Because as good and talented as he is, the threat to Lando isn't coming from in front of him. It's not coming from Max Verstappen. The real threat he's facing, and also the biggest one he's going to face next year, are the drivers behind him. And I'm talking about Charles Leclerc, Oscar Piastri, or perhaps even George Russell on his day, all of whom are behind him in the standings but can still give him an enormous amount of trouble during a Grand Prix weekend. And Norris as well now, he's got 3 races to conclusively outperform Oscar Piastri and show McLaren that he is the guy to bet on for the championship next season. And not just for 2025, but also the years ahead. So I sense one of his massive priorities right now will be not to let Oscar get the better of him. And also McLaren do need to slam the door shut on Ferrari in the Constructors' Championship, which they haven't been able to do yet. So not only will Lando want to race and outperform Oscar, he'll know that any collisions or coming together or accidents will be catastrophic for McLaren's Constructors' Championship cause. Okay, and following on now, we have got Charles Leclerc. Now, Leclerc is a fascinating one because genuinely in these last 3 rounds, he'll be thinking he's got the car and the ability to do a clean sweep of all 3 of the last races. In regular dry conditions, which is what these last 3 Grand Prix are looking to be, Ferrari look the most dangerous. And also have the form too, so adding some wins and pole positions to his record will be a massive priority. In turn, this will then nudge him closer to Norris in the driver's standings and also could be a deciding factor with Ferrari's place in the Constructors' battle too. But also, these final 3 races are his last ones at Ferrari before the whole Hamilton machine or circus or whatever you want to call it arrives at Ferrari. So he has 3 races to get as many people on side at the team and become even more of a Ferrari man than he is right now. And just add more cases to the argument that if Ferrari have to back a single driver next season, it has to be him. So overall in these last few races, Leclerc is going to want Verstappen to have absolutely no doubts towards his World Championship credentials next season. And so next in line, we've got Oscar Piastri. With Oscar now in these final rounds, I sense this is a guy who smells blood, and if the car underneath him does what it should do, he could be a real force to be reckoned with. And whilst he was aiding Lando Norris's title hopes, he seemed like a guy whose wind was taken out of his sails. He just looked flat, and this was totally different to the Oscar that we saw in the first 2/3 of the season. And now that McLaren's priority has shifted towards the constructor standings, it now doesn't matter who wins. wins between Oscar and Lando, just as long as it's one of their drivers. So now that the chains and shackles are off, I think certainly pole positions and podiums are well within a shout of Oscar. He won't necessarily need to win outright, but if he outperformed Lando Norris, that will be enough for him, I think, at this stage. And it would certainly aid any claims for McLaren to have equal driver treatment for 2025. So for Oscar, he's going to want to do everything he can to ensure a clean slate at the start of next season. But can you imagine if it was actually Oscar who got McLaren over the line to confirm the Constructors' Championships? If it was his result that mathematically confirmed it, now that would be a statement moving forward. And so next in line, we've got Carlos Sainz. Now, Carlos faces quite an emotional last 3 races. Not only because it might be his last time as a Ferrari driver, but maybe the last time for a little while that he will be driving a car that can win or get podiums on merit, as of course he's heading off to Williams next season. Now, unlike the others, I'm not sensing his drive for position in the Drivers' or Constructors' Championships. However, I think in these final 3 rounds he should just enjoy himself and embrace having that sort of car underneath him. But also just by being at ease and being in the moment and being confident with his driving is probably right now his best way to get the most out of these final 3 rounds. You know what, if all goes well, Sainz could easily win a Grand Prix in these final 3 races, and that would be a pretty good goodbye from his time at Ferrari, or perhaps even a see you later, because you never know what's going to happen. So ultimately, Carlos is going to want to end his time at Ferrari on a high note, go out on a high, and have memories to hold on to, because Williams, I suspect, next season is going to be a very different experience. Okay, so next up we have George Russell. Okay, so straight away off the bat, a massive factor for George going into the final rounds of 2024 is that he doesn't yet have a contract for Mercedes for after 2025. And that is something that is looming more and more as the days go by. And something which of course hasn't helped is that it appears Toto has kind of lost interest in George as of late, which means there's been no chats of new contracts. So George has got these last 3 races to really kind of reignite some interest in himself and his name before we go into the season break. So George has got to beat Lewis in the driver standings. He did so in 2022, missed out in 2023, so this is an absolute must for him. Now, whilst a win is unlikely, pole positions and podiums could still be on the cards. Points, of course, mean prizes, and if he can go into next season with a renewed curiosity about him as team leader at Mercedes. Now, credit to George, he's done fantastically well to close the gap to Lewis in the standings so far, but he really needs to use these final 3 rounds to act as a shop window for Toto Wolff, just so he can see exactly why he should sign up George on a new contract. Or perhaps maybe for other teams to have a look at as well. Okay, so next up now, we've got Lewis Hamilton. Okay, so for Lewis, I think all the signs show now that he cannot wait to climb out of that Mercedes at Abu Dhabi for one last time and get on a one-way flight to Italy. But because of this factor as well, he hasn't really been amazing for 2024. He really has fallen below what we would call a standard for him, and has therefore led people to question whether Ferrari have really made the right decision in signing him. Now, because of where he's been and the high points in his career, he won't really care about beating George in the standings or even finishing 6th. That sort of position in the standings won't even register to him. What he does need to do, though, is put in some performances to remind everyone of what he is capable of, even if he doesn't like the car. And yet again, just to reassure not just Ferrari, but also the Tifosi that they've made the right decision in taking him on next season. So in these last 3 rounds, Hamilton must summon up as much of the late 2010s as he possibly can. And that's not just for renewed motivation or just to get good results, it's also just to kind of silence any doubters before he completes this Ferrari move. And a complicated one next is Sergio Perez. Now, I'm not really sure what you can say about Perez right now, because expectations and reputation are probably at an all-time low now. He's cost Red Bull the Constructors' title and seems to be light years behind Max in every department aside from commercial backing, of course. And either way, I sense he'll want to end the season as soon as possible and start fresh on what will apparently be a Red Bull drive for 2025. But Sergio, if he just gets his act together, pulls himself together, he could be a real factor in securing Red Bull's 2nd place in the Constructors' Championship. It's not a massive ask for Sergio just to finish 6th or 5th at Vegas, Qatar, or Abu Dhabi, just to make Ferrari's lives harder and just take points off necessary drivers. That can't be too much. He certainly has the car to do it, but whether he actually can at this stage is yet to be decided. I'd really love him to just turn it on in these last 3 races, but in all reality, I can kind of expect him to be doddering around between 9th and 14th place. And that, to be honest, is a shame. Okay, so next up we've got Fernando Alonso. I've got to be honest here, I think Fernando has just got to get to the end of the season with his mind and body intact. It's been a horrific season for him so far. Now, of course, he'll be pushing to squeeze the absolute best out of the car, and he's got enough pride in himself to not give up. But what has he got to look forward to next season? Well, I'm not that sure. Right now, Alonso and Aston Martin are fairly isolated in their standings, so there's not really much that can be gained or lost by this stage. Unlike some other drivers who want to put in some good performances this year so they can capitalise on new circumstances next year, I know that Newey's coming on board anyway, but in the short term, I don't really see things being that much different for Alonso or Aston next season. Which does throw in the question of really, how does Alonso keep going at this stage? But ultimately, I just think he wants to finish this year with his mental health and his body intact. Okay, so let's kick things off with the one and only Nico Hülkenberg. Now, with some of his performances this year, a renewed sense of Hulkamania has been running wild. But how he's going to repeat this sort of form or results next season is anyone's guess. Right now, I think he just needs to soak up the maximum of what it feels like to drive a car that can quite happily finish in the latter half of the points. Because I'm certain he is not going to get that next year. So for Hulk now, he just needs to relish it, grab what he can, and take any kind of positivity or motivation over to Sauber next season, who, by the way, if you haven't noticed, need it desperately. Haas, of course, are still in the fight with Alpine for 6th in the constructor standing, so millions of dollars at play there. So Hulk needs to do what he's done best all of so far this season and just chip away at those latter point scoring positions. Also, you never know, at Vegas, Qatar, Abu Dhabi, the planets could align and the greatest thing could happen in the world and Hulk could finally get his podium. Right, so next up is Yuki Tsunoda. Now, with Yuki ending a massive point-scoring drought at the Brazilian Grand Prix, he is going to want to continue this form until the end of the season. But of course, what will be playing on his mind is the uncertainty around Perez's future at Red Bull. And Yuki will want to do absolutely everything he can to be first in the queue if it all, hits the fan. And also, he'll want to squash any kind of question that Liam Lawson could get the better of him. And he needs to keep an eye on this because Lawson is currently riding a wave of popularity that could easily overshadow anything that Tsunoda does. So the long and short of it is that Yuki just needs to do everything he can, whether he scores points or not, to put himself and solidify himself as first in the queue at Red Bull. And not only that, but make sure everyone else knows it too. And so next up we have Pierre Gasly. So Monsieur Gasly, in his beautiful new shock pink Alpine liveried car for the last 3 rounds, just has to continue this momentum that was found from the podiums at the Brazilian Grand Prix. He's also got a long-term contract, so he's safe in that aspect and can drive with a level of comfort. And what will also spur him on is knowing that he's pretty much won the Ocon-Gasly civil war that has gripped Alpine for the last 2 seasons. Also, by snatching points, he could still wind up 10th in the driver standings, which is effectively top of this 3rd tier. You've got the front runners, and then you have Fernando Alonso, who is isolated, and then you have the rest, the 3rd tier. And not only that, he's going to be the guy that everyone Alpine next season will be looking towards. So he has these 3 races to finish, sowing those seeds and show some leadership in the team, which they can grab onto moving forward. And so after Gasly, next up we've got Lance Stroll. Oh, Lance. What do we say about Lance? Okay, so first things first, the biggest priority at this stage has got to be bring the car home in one piece and also in a position which isn't terrible. Surely that can't be too much to ask for. Just no more crashes or silly accidents because his reputation is on life support. It may already be dead. In fact, it could be worse, it's probably zombified by now. Lance hasn't scored since Hungary and probably won't do so in the next 3 rounds, but can just try and show something that will maybe start to change people's minds ever so slightly. And also, if he does have an accident or a mistake or an error, either way wrecks the car, and it is his fault, just say sorry. Sorry is a fantastic word, and it goes so far. So basically, don't wreck the car and accept responsibility. He has got probably the easiest run-in of any of the drivers this season. And so next up, we've got Esteban Ocon. Now, aside from his fantastic podium in Brazil, 2024 has been a pretty awful season for Ocon and one to forget. especially now that he's been booted out of his own team by arch rival Pierre Gasly. I think what Ocon needs to do from now until the end of the season is just drive in such a way that people get excited and interested about his future move to Haas. To myself anyway, I see him as a downgrade from Hülkenberg and even Magnussen at times, so he just kind of has to drum up this interest that this move, and also possibly the money that they've paid to sign him, is worth it. And in the final 3 rounds, he could perhaps sneak a point or maybe 2, but ultimately, if he was to beat Pierre Gasly in the driver standings, and he's not that far off, that would be a massive success for him before he walked out of the door at Alpine. And next in line, we've got Kevin Magnussen. Now, I'm genuinely going to miss K-Mag, not because of his driving ability, but for that personality he has that I think is so important to have in F1. Amongst all the please love me, please like me kind of drivers, it's kind of refreshing to have a driver like K-Mag who isn't really fussed and also can still hold his own on the track. So K-Mag in these final 3 races just needs to do what he does best. Snatch points, of course, if the opportunity arises, but if Hülkenberg is ahead and looking like Haas's best option, then just be the ultimate team player, create havoc, cause frustration, and make the other drivers' lives harder. It's just gamesmanship in its basic form, and Magnussen is very, very good at that. He's been a great servant to Haas, it's a shame to see him go, but with 2025, you never know, he might need to keep his phone switched on. Okay, so next up is Alex Albon. Now, Albon faces a seriously tricky run into the final 3 rounds. His luck since Singapore has been dreadful, and he needs to rediscover form, but also make sure that Colapinto doesn't get the better of him. Now, I know he's got a contract, he's confirmed for next season, but ultimately that will not be a good look. Now, the reality is Williams are limping to the end of the season and just want this one to be over as quick as possible. They're effectively locked into their position in the constructor standings after a killer blow from Alpine at the Brazilian Grand Prix. And so with Albon being the senior driver, of course, he needs to really step up and show some resilience and leadership in this final run-in. Now, of course, he may already be doing that, but from what we've seen so far, I'm not getting the sense that that's really happening. Now, the track types in these final 3 races should suit Albon and Williams, but because of their recent accidents and damages, points in any of these final 3 races, I think, would be a miracle. Let's just wait and see. And next up is Oliver Bearman. Now, you might be wondering why I've decided to put Bearman in this list, but one reason is because he's currently 18th in the driver standings, 7 points from 3 races. And all it takes is a virus or a stomach bug from someone at Ferrari or Haas, and boom, he's right back in there. And so with that, he may as well bring his gear to Vegas, Qatar, or Abu Dhabi. And if he's not called up, then he needs to take the time to soak up everything he can whilst he can walk freely and talk to anyone he wants at the Ferrari garage. Even if it's just a quick chat with Leclerc or Sainz and the Ferrari crew, just so that he can arrive swinging at Haas in 2025. But in the meantime, all he can really do is sit and watch and wait and just be ready to jump in the car if needed. Okay, and next up is Franco Colapinto. So in these last 3 races, Colapinto really has a big job on his hands. He's had a very impressive run so far as Sargent's replacement. Okay, he had a small blip in Brazil, but now he has 3 races to show everybody that he is the genuine article and the real deal. A solid showing in these final 3 races would be a signal that this is a guy who needs to be in a race seat as soon as possible. But on the other hand, a lackluster showing or even another costly accident might take the eyes and interest of F1 away from Colapinto and onto someone else. Everything moves so quickly in Formula 1, and a driver can quickly go from the flavour of the month to, well, he's not as good as we thought he was. So to avoid this, Colapinto and his Williams that might be ramshackled together just needs to drive maturely and confidently. Points would be nice at this stage, but I don't really think that's going to affect things. Even if he finishes the next 3 races 10th, 12th, 13th, 14th, but drove with purpose and maturity, that would be enough, I think, to kind of seal him for better things in the future. In fact, that's exactly just what he needs to do. He needs to drive in a way that keeps the Colapinto hype train rolling forwards. And next up is Liam Lawson. Now, Lawson has a very interesting opportunity now to get as close as possible, even surpass his predecessor Daniel Ricciardo in the Drivers' Championship. Now, it won't be his ultimate goal, but it would be a great statement of intent and a message to Red Bull management that they've made the right decision in bringing him on. And furthermore, this effort will be fueled by the small factor that the seats-long Max may not be as confirmed as they say. So Lawson has to take every opportunity in the next 3 races, not just to do a better job than Tsunoda, but also Perez as well as a bonus. He's more or less in exactly the same sort of situation as Tsunoda, where he has to drive in these next 3 races in a certain way so that he is first in the queue for Red Bull should anything happen with Sergio Perez. Okay, next up is Zhou Guanyu. Now, there can't be a whole lot spurring on Guanyu at the moment. Points are out of reach and there is no drive for 2025. After what's been a very disappointing year for him, I'm sure that he just wants to get to the end and into that Ferrari reserve role that's been rumoured around him recently. And what could help that along and bring it to fruition is to show Maranello some performances where there's no mistakes and no silly errors, and just to drive with confidence and just show that ability, flashes of that ability that we saw at Alfa Romeo. And also there's a small factor that Guanyu has been beaten by Bottas in the driver standings 2 years in a row. He's ahead of him this year. It's his first chance to beat his teammate in the standings, so Guanyu is going to see that probably now as his main goal for this season. Okay, and last up now, finally, is Valtteri Bottas. It's actually stunning to think rock bottom of the Drivers' Championship, even behind Logan Sargent, is Bottas. Now, of course, finishing last in the standings is an elite club that Bottas won't want to join anytime soon. And I'm sure will do everything in his power to try and correct this in the final 3 rounds. And he doesn't even need points finishes to do this. This is how desperate it actually is. Now, if I'm correct, if he just manages to finish 11th or 12th place in the final 3 races, that should be enough to lift him above Sargent and Zhou Guanyu. Honestly, he just needs to live on a steady diet of days of thunder and motivation over the next 3 weeks to pull this off. And this sort of hunger as well would also show Mercedes that Bottas still has some fire in the belly, and a return in the form of a Mercedes reserve drive could be worth the investment. Let's just hope those green flames painted on the Sauber car will add something to the performance, even if it's just psychological. That's how bad it's got. It's still amazing to think that we are getting towards the end of the 2024 season. It didn't seem that long ago that we were kicking things off and looking at these carbon fiber liveries at the start of the season. So overall, every driver, whether it's the top half or the bottom half, has their own little missions, interests, and things to look out for in these final stages. And you know what? From a fan perspective, we better soak it up, because that season break seems to take forever. But where do you guys think drivers' priorities lie? Do let me know in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching, of course, and showing your support. I'm Paul, and as always, I'll see you later. Cheers.